How I Met Your Mother, Dexter, Game of Thrones, Viktor Gyokeres. What do these all have in common? Great stories with terrible endings. Now usually I would read off a script or something and have a full monologue, whatever, planned, but this is going to be straight from me to the camera, similar to what I did with my Ruben Amorim to our Manchester United video, sort of thank you video there, with a thank you video to Viktor Gyokeres. Now, as I said, the story perhaps didn't end as I wanted to and most sporting fans wanted to, but at the end of the day, he was the best player I've ever seen in Portugal. And maybe that is bias, of course, sporting fan, as you can tell by the background and everything. Maybe that is bias, but I have seen a lot of fantastic players come in the Portuguese league. Bruno Fernandes, for example, Angel Di Maria, Ramirez, Falcao, David Luiz, Oscar Cardozo, Jonas, Annie, Casemiro, Eder Militao, Hulk. The list goes on, and I'm sure there's players I've missed there. But in terms of overall impact to a team, to the squad, and being a member of the squad that can win you games and carry you to victories and to titles in some instances, Viktor Gyokeres for me is a level above. The only one for me that I would put in comparison to Viktor Gyokeres is Radamel Falcao, who of course did it in the Europa League, had a fantastic season which will probably never replicate again in terms of Europa League goal scoring, but also that same year being unbeaten with Porto in the league from under Villas-Boas is something that is incredible. Like I said, I don't think it's ever going to happen again. Ruben Amorim was close in 2021, unfortunately losing one game to Benfica when the title was already won. That could have been an invincible season, but of course that was before Gyökeres, and now I'm waffling, so I digress. But it's crazy the impact Viktor Gyokeres had at Sporting, not just with the team but with the fan base as well. I'm sure you've seen all the videos of people doing the Gyökeres celebration across the Jose Alvalade and of course a lot of other stadiums. That has also translated into athletes and famous people doing it, such as an example off the top of my head is Angelo Dawkins, a SmackDown wrestler who did it on a live show. I'm sure there's other examples of it. He even got people from Benfica's and Porto's academy to do the celebration. That's how much influence Viktor Gyokeres had in Portugal. He was getting rival academy graduates and academy players to do his celebration. That's something we're probably going to never ever see in Portugal again. But in terms of his goal scoring, was it 97 goals across 2 seasons, is incredible. And of course the argument's going to be made, it's only the Portuguese league, but the players I mentioned, the Falcaos, the Darwins, the Jackson Martinez, the Bastos even, they couldn't get his goals to game ratio. They couldn't be as good as he is. No one has been like Viktor Gyokeres. Of course I mentioned the comparison to Falcao, but if you ask me, if you put Falcao in the Sporting team and Gyökeres in that Porto team, I think the Porto team is still the same. The Porto team will win and still be great. Viktor Gyokeres will probably match the goals that Falcao gets. If you put Falcao in the Sporting team, I really don't see if it's going to be the same effect. And that's no disrespect to Falcao. Of course, he was fantastic, not just at Porto, but Atletico Madrid as well. Whereas Gyökeres has just had a few good seasons at Coventry and now at Sporting, of course. I was going to say Brighton, but he didn't do well at Brighton. 2 good seasons at Coventry, 2 great seasons at Sporting, and in the Champions League and things like that. His impact is crazy. He is Sporting's joint top goal scorer in the Champions League. He's played 1 season of Champions League football. 1 season, and he's already the top goal scorer in Sporting's history, joint with Lietson, who played in multiple competitions. That kind of influence is understated. And you can mention about the penalties and stuff, but in the biggest stage, you still have to convert them. And that's what the biggest argument for him against was Man City, that he scored ugly goals. He scored a hat-trick, 2 of them are penalties. But if you ask me, someone who can do that on the top stage, convert penalties, in arguably the biggest stage of Viktor Gyokeres' career at that point, all the cameras on him, all the focus was on him, and he managed to perform, scoring twice against Ederson from the penalty spot, and 1, maybe you could argue lucky goal, but it still goes in regardless. And he also had another chance that game. Instead of we tried to chip it instead of putting it around Ederson, but it is what it is. He managed to do well, and he still scored games after that. Of course, the Arsenal game wasn't great, and that's where he's joining. So if you are an Arsenal fan, maybe that's all you've seen of him, you're going to think, wow, like, why are we signing this stud of a player? But you have to put context into the situation. We had a new manager. It was the game, 2 games even after Ruben Amorim left, and Gyökeres was playing in a different role, sort of similar formation to Ruben Amorim, but a few tweaks, and the squad did not mesh with João Pereira at all, who was the backup manager, or sorry, the replacement manager for Ruben Amorim. So no one gelled with him, and it wasn't just a Gyökeres thing. No player improved under João Pereira. Hjulmand was was poor. Giovanni Kenda, Marcus Edwards, Pedro Gonçalves was injured, unfortunately didn't get a chance. Trincao, these players did regress under João Pereira, so it's not just a Gyökeres thing. But then as soon as Rui Borges comes back into the team and after Gyökeres deals with an injury, he's back to his goal scoring ways. Of course, scoring in the Taça de Portugal final, beating Benfica, scoring against Viktor Gyokeres to seal the title for Sporting as well. Giving Sporting, Viktor Gyokeres, of course Ruben Amorim as well, giving Sporting back-to-back titles for the first time in 70 years. In 70 years, that is what Viktor Gyokeres was capable of. That is crazy. And of course, he's not a one-man team. But in terms of the vocal point of that team, Gyökeres is up there. But I will give shout-outs to Hjulmand as well, fantastic. This year, Rui Silva in goal was fantastic. You've got Diamonde, Gonzalo Inacio. Before that, Sebastian Coates, and the list goes on. There are definitely many people to shout out. Paulinho, the GOAT as well, behind me there. So there's many people to shout out, of course. But for me, the influence that Gyökeres has had on this club cannot be understated. Do I wish he probably went for more? Yeah, maybe. But I guess it's always going to be hard to convince a club to pay over the odds for a 27-year-old striker who's only done it in one league. But that being said, in terms of Viktor Gyökeres' entire career at Sporting, it was 2 years. But he did make Sporting enjoyable to watch, especially, obviously Ruben Amorim did as well, but the 23-24 and 24-25, it was crazy. You were like, Viktor Gyökeres got the ball and it was a goal. Like, it didn't matter if it was at the halfway line, in the corner flag. He was just so good at reading opposition and using his body against the opposition to score goals that it was just fantastic what he was able to do. Some of the goals he scored, I know some of them aren't pretty to the eye, but they go in, and like that's all I cared about as a football fan, sporting fan as well. If the goals went in, I didn't care how they scored. If it was tap-ins, if it was 40-yard screamers, if it was step-overs and a trivela, whatever it is. As long as the goals went in, I really didn't care, and that's for any player. But Viktor Gyökeres does have a sort of ugly goal catalogue, if you want to put it to that aspect. But for me, it doesn't matter how they went in. They do go in. But he was also incredible in big games. Goals against Benfica, I mentioned before, but goals against Porto, goals against Manchester City, goals against Atalanta, goals against RB Leipzig, and the list goes on and on. Lille in the Champions League as well. He's a big game player, and people will ask, is he going to excel in the Premier League? Is he going to be a success? And the answer is, as much as it's a boring one, is that I just don't know. I don't know if Mikel Arteta will make use of Gyökeres like an Amorim or Rui Borges did. It'll be interesting to see how he meshes into the Arsenal team, because I think even if you're an Arsenal fan, if you're not, you can argue the one thing that Arsenal missed the most last year, in my opinion, was of Saka being injured, of course, but a goal-scoring threat. I like Kai Havertz, I like Gabby Jesus, I like, Mikel Merino, Trossard, but these guys aren't natural lethal finishers. And I think that is what Arsenal missed a lot of last year, is a lethal finisher, someone who can score goals and even convert penalties in that aspect as well. There were some times that Arsenal missed a few penalties last year, but at the end of the day, I don't know if he's going to be on penalties, or it's going to be Saka, or it's going to be Declan Rice, whoever it's going to be. But I think having someone who can score goals, no matter if they're ugly or not, someone who can create their own chances, who is a powerhouse and can be used to their full potential, it will be difficult to see how he doesn't succeed. But of course, there are variables at play as well. How does he correlate with the rest of the squad? Because if you look at Sporting's system, it's suited a lot to Viktor Gyökeres' strengths. I don't know if Arsenal and Mikel Arteta are going to set up the squad the same way. Of course, he can change his tactics maybe, but we've seen over the last, 4 or 5 years that Mikel Arteta is very set on a philosophy, and he doesn't look like he's going to be changing it anytime soon. He likes the sort of hold-up play and link-up play of Kai Havertz. Gyökeres maybe doesn't have that in his locker as well as Kai Havertz does, especially with technique and ball control and things like that. But in terms of an out-and-out goal scorer, someone being physical against opposition defenders, I think it's a win-win situation. The price tag, of course, is a risk, but I think any £70 million striker or player is a risk. You look at the top 10 signings of all time, show me how many of them are risks and didn't pay off, even if they were sort of a proven player, which Gyökeres isn't, but that's an argument for another day. I still think any transfer is a risk, no matter what the money is. I don't know if Gyökeres will perform at Arsenal. I've made videos about it before, saying that I think he'll be a perfect fit for Arsenal, but that's if used to his full capabilities. I have faith that Mikel Arteta will do so, I suppose. But at the end of the day, it's going to be a case of that spotlight is going to be on him heavy, because there were links to guys like Alexander Isak for Arsenal. Benjamin Sesko was the #1 priority for the last few months until Gyökeres for whatever reason became the number 1 priority instead, or the number 2 priority because maybe they couldn't afford Sesko. There's been talks of Victor Osimhen. The list goes on of the strikers that will be looked at if Gyökeres doesn't score maybe in the first 2-3 games. And of course, that first game for Arsenal against Manchester United is going to be an interesting one because of it's going to be Gyökeres versus Amorim. We'll see who comes out on top of that one. I'm sure it'll be a nice encounter and a fiery encounter for Viktor Gyokeres. But in terms of how he left Sporting, now this is where the story gets sad. Well, not sad, but this is where a lot of Sporting fans sort of go off Viktor Gyokeres. And he has a legacy which is untouchable in my opinion. But a lot of Sporting fans will say that he ruined his legacy. He went out the little door instead of going out the big door, which basically means that he took almost the coward's way out. He forced his way out. He didn't show up to pre-season training. He was throwing his toys out the pram. And if you believe that maybe Varandas didn't abide by a gentleman's agreement, which personally I don't believe because he's shown no history of doing that with any other players. Whereas Viktor Gyokeres' agent has said on many different times to many different players, for example, Emil Forsberg in this link here, apparently they agreed a fee and that didn't go through. So how many times has this happened for a client of Gyökeres' agent, but it's not happened a lot at Sporting? But I still think the ending of it is just a shame because I do think this deal could have been done if Gyökeres doesn't try and force anything, because the fee, to be honest, I think it's a fair reflection of Viktor Gyökeres, and the fact that Arsenal was so stingy to pay it, just, this is my opinion. It doesn't have to be the case of yours. This is just from where I'm sitting. The case that Arsenal took so long to get the instalments, the objectives, whereas for Madueke, they were like 52 million up front or whatever it was in instalments. That's fine. There was sort of no arguments there. But when if someone like Gyökeres, they were haggling every penny. But that's just my opinion. I don't know what the full story is. And that's the thing. We might never know what the full story is. We don't know if there was a gentleman's agreement because the only people in the room were his agent, Hugo Viana, and Federico Varandas. Hugo Viana, of course, isn't going to say it as a Manchester City director of football. Varandas has his story. Gyökeres' agent has his story. We're never going to know the truth, unfortunately. But maybe biased, maybe not. But I think Federico Varandas has never shown that before. There have been loads of people going on ChatGPT or whatever it is, AI, and being like, look, this is Federico Varandas saying, oh, he didn't let Pedro Porro go, but he'd let Pedro Porro go. He literally went the day after that report came out. The same with Bruno Fernandes. Oh, he was going to let Bruno Fernandes go. Bruno Fernandes left the day after. And there's so many other examples. Nuno Mendes, Ugarte, João Palhinha, Mateus Nunes. He didn't haggle over a single penny. He never sort of kept anyone against their will. If they wanted to leave and there was a fair price, that's fine. As far as I know, and as far as it's been reported in the media, obviously you could believe English over Portuguese, but as far as I know, Federico Varandas has never kept someone against his will. But that being said, I wasn't in the room, so I really don't know. But in my heart, I trust Federico Varandas did the right thing. I am less inclined to believe any agent, doesn't matter if it's Gyökeres or if it's George Mendes or someone like that. I just choose not to believe it. And maybe that's naive, but oh well. At the end of the day, Viktor Gyokeres is a Sporting legend. There's no doubt about it. I have another one on my wall there, the captain, Sebastian Coates, who won 2 league titles. Paulinho, more of a cult hero, than a legend. But, Viktor Gyokeres for me is the best striker I've ever seen in Portugal, the best player I've ever seen in Portugal. And like I said, that might be biased, but what he was able to do for Sporting was incredible. And at the end of the day, Arsenal are getting a fantastic striker. Sporting are losing one, and it's going to be very, very difficult to replace at Sporting. Even if you look at the Sporting side, I know I've talked a lot about Arsenal and stuff, but in terms of the next striker who comes in for Sporting, it looks like it's going to be Luis Suarez from Almeria. He's going to have so much pressure on him because if he doesn't score in his debut, doesn't score consistently, they're all going to be thinking about Viktor Gyokeres. Well, Viktor Gyokeres did it in every single game, almost. So the pressure on him is going to be incredible, and the pressure on the rest of the team now to even combat that scoring, to sort of help out the load with Pedro Gonçalves, Trincao, Giovanni Kende, Jenny, Maxi, all these guys that are going to have to fill in and try and score and try and almost make the goals up that Viktor Gyokeres is leaving behind. But I don't know what's going to happen. Maybe Luis Suarez becomes better than Gyökeres. Unlikely, but who knows. But anyway, this has been a thank you to Viktor Gyokeres. Not only have you been fantastic, you also helped me when I did this running every single time Viktor Gyokeres scored a goal. You can see that on screen. but I managed to run, I think it's like 135 kilometers. That's, you know, crazy. And I got fitter because of it. So shout out Viktor Gyokeres. But anyway, I've been Tamaseka. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time, and peace.